Okay, so now moving on to the next question. Now it's given that m is less than p and mv is less than pv is less than 0. We have to compare minus m by p and v. Okay. Before I proceed on with the question, I would like to just make a few things clear. For example, if A is less than B is less than C is given, right? This basically means there are three possible cases, right? That means A is less than B, right? It also means B is less than C, and it also means A is less than C, right? So these three things are basically possible. Okay, perfect. Right. Uh, so if we take this, so we can, because this is given mv is less than pv is less than 0, so we can take mv is less than pv, right? We can take this. Okay, one more thing that I would like to tell here is that, for example, if there are two numbers, for example, a into b is less than uh, b into c, for example, right? You can cut off these two numbers and write a is less than c only and only if b is greater than 0, right? If b is less than 0, right, then if you would cut off these, then the sign would change. So if b is negative, you cut off these, then the answer would not be a is less than c. No, then the answer would be a is greater than c. In the case if b is less than 0, if b is greater than 0, you can directly cut it off. But if b is less than 0, you can cut b and b, but then the signs get opposite. So a is greater than z. So this is one thing, right? Okay, perfect. So the reason I told you this is because mv is less than pv, right? We are also given that m is less than p. M is less than p, right? That means we can cut v and we will get m is less than p, right? So this means v has to be positive. Simple. So this means that v is greater than 0. If the question would have been that m is greater than p, this is given, right? And mv is less than pv, right? If these two things were given, right, then if we cut vv, then m is less than p, but m is greater than p, then v has to be negative, right? If the question would have been m is greater than p, right? Okay, but the question is that m is less than p, so we can cut vv, we get m is less than p, that means v is greater than 0. That is one thing for sure, right? So this is one thing for sure. Perfect, no doubt. Now, since mv is less than 0, right? mv is less than 0, and we know v is greater than 0, right? That means m has to be less than 0, right? Because if there are two numbers which are less than 0, then one has to be positive and the other has to be negative. If both are positive, the answer will be positive. If both are negative, then also it will be positive. So if it is negative, then one has to be positive and other has to be negative. But we know v is positive, that means m has to be negative, right? So this is another thing that we have found, right? Similarly, PV is also less than 0. Since PV is less than 0, that means P is less than 0. Again, the same logic, because V is greater than 0 and this is negative, so P has to be negative, right? So P is less than 0. Now, if you see minus M by P, right? So minus M is negative upon P is negative, right? So negative upon negative is positive because they cancel out. So negative upon negative is positive, right? So minus times of positive, this will be negative, right? So this overall term will be negative because m was negative, p was negative, negative negative cancel, this is positive into negative, so this is negative, right? What about v? V is positive, which is given, right? So one side is positive, the other side is negative. So it's obvious that this is greater, right? So that means V is greater and minus m by p is smaller. So the answer is B. I hope you understand this entire thing. I think this is not very complex. If you did not know this, just be careful with this. Firstly, if A is less than B is less than C, that means A is less than B and B is less than C and A is less than C. All of these three things are possible. Secondly, if A into B is less than B into C, right? So we can cancel B if B is greater than 0. If B is less than 0, then we can cancel B, but we have to change the sign. We have to make the sign opposite. So we can cancel B, but the sign becomes opposite. That means A is greater than C if B is less than 0. So similarly, we were given MV is less than PV is less than 0, right? So if we cancel V, we get M less than P, which is given. Absolutely fine. So that means V has to be positive, because if V would have been negative, then M would be greater than P, because V we cancel, M greater than P if V is negative, but V is positive. So M is less than P, so V is positive. That is one thing clear. Now, MV is less than 0, right? If there is a term which is less than 0, that means one has to be positive and the other has to be negative. Since V is greater than V is positive, we know that. So that means M has to be negative. Similarly, P has to be negative. Now, negative upon negative is positive. Positive into negative is negative. V is positive. So this is greater. So answer is B.